Thank you for coming out to tonight's Lvmen Scientiae presentation. Tonight we're going to learn a little bit about Hindu philosophy. Chester Boncek has graciously come out from the Vedanta Center in Providence and illuminate us, teach us a little bit about something. So hopefully we'll get something from it. Thank you, Chester, for coming out. We really appreciate it. And with that, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Good evening, everybody. I am, as Aaron pointed out, representing the Vedanta Society of Providence, Rhode Island at the request of Swami Yogatmananda. The title of my presentation is Vedanta, Hinduism, and the Universal Search for Truth. So one of the key ideas of Vedanta right off the bat is depicted here. In the top, it's the ancient Sanskrit language, which is the spiritual language of India. I have the translation below. Truth is one. Sages, people, use different words. The truth is beyond symbolism. And so any attempt to convert truth into symbols suffers for a little bit from a translation. We have here symbols. Vedanta supports the spiritual traditions universally. We have the symbols here, Om from the Hindu tradition, the cross from the Christian tradition, the wheel from the Buddhist tradition, the menorah from the Judaic tradition, the crescent from Islam, the yin-yang from the Taoist tradition, and the universal fire from the Zoroastrians. Vedanta recognizes the sages from all traditions. So with that, we're going to look tonight at the reason Vedanta supports this view and takes this view. So my talk will have roughly 3 sections. Okay, so we'll have 3 sections of the talk. The first part I'm going to talk a little bit, it's more of a history and a timeline. We'll talk a little bit about the history of Hinduism, Vedanta, and yoga teachings. I'm going to explain what the Vedas are and a set of scriptures called Upanishads, especially within the context of the Vedas. We'll look briefly at a quick timeline of significant spiritual events in India from ancient to modern. We'll take a look at different approaches to living the Vedic teachings. I'll talk a little bit about the Ramakrishna monastic order because the monastic order of Ramakrishna is the folks that run the Vedanta Society of Providence, Rhode Island, from whom I'm representing. In part 2, we'll actually dive into the high philosophy of the Vedantic teachings and descriptions of reality as described in the Upanishads. And by then you'll know I'll have explained what the Upanishads are. And then in part 3, we'll do what I call practical Vedanta. And these are the practices and principles, living which will lead us to the realization of this truth as described in the Upanishads. So it'll be about a 1-hour talk, and then those who want to have a dialogue afterwards, we can have a dialogue. Now, every teaching of the Upanishads begins with a traditional chant. So I'll do one from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It's in Sanskrit, but I have the translation underneath for you to follow. So it begins, Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityumram Amrgam Gamaya, Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Shanti 3 times is peace, peace, peace. And it gives us protection against the 3 different torments of the world. In all teachings of the Upanishads begin with 1 or more chants. Let's talk a little bit about where this philosophy comes from and this lifestyle. Scholars generally agree that about 1500 before Common Era BC in India, there was a civilization of indigenous people living in the region of the Indus River Valley. About the same time, a group of Aryans from the Caucasus regions of central Russia came down through the region of what's Afghanistan today, across through what's Pakistan today, and into India. They brought with them these Veda teachings, the Vedic teachings. Now, scholars have looked at this, and because about the same time, the indigenous civilizations, which were pretty much agreed by historians to be fairly sophisticated civilizations, but they were on the decline. And originally it was proposed that the Aryan migration caused the destruction or the collapse of those societies. That's since been ruled out by the majority of scholars. And that's an important fact in my talk tonight because it'll help you explain how Hinduism got its very complex nature. If you come across any Hindu teachings at all, from a surface level, from a high level, it will look like a pantheic, multi-gods system. But the Vedantic teachings is actually monotheistic, and how do we reconcile these two things? We'll talk about that. So the name Hindu itself is more of a geographic indicator, because as the Vedic migration was coming down, they used the word Sindhu, which gets translated today as Hindu, and it basically means people of the Indus River Valley. So more than indicating a religion, it indicates a geographic region, in particular the people living to the southeast of the Indus River Valley. Eventually, the Aryans migrated all the way down to the Ganges River Valley and into India as well. Here we have depicted an actual carving that was excavated from one of the civilizations, Harappa, in the Indus River Valley. And it has a person, you can see them in one of the yoga postures, which is conducive to the high meditative states. And they also have some elephants and tigers and things there. And this script, which is not the same script as I opened the talk with, it's not the Sanskrit script, but it's the one that was of the indigenous people. That, to the best of my knowledge, has not been fully translated even to this day. So we don't know quite what this says, but we know that they had a sophisticated society. We're going to look at some of the teachings. The important thing is that as the Aryan migration came down, they came not with an attitude of conquer or annihilate or convert, but rather as they progressed, they learned from the local people, from the indigenous people. They came with an attitude of love, teaching and learning. And wherever the philosophy of the local villages and things didn't align exactly with the Vedic teachings, they absorbed, they learned, and they tried to reconcile and advance their teachings and their understandings as well. So it wasn't, you will do like we tell you, it is we're on this search for universal truth. And that's, I think, an important thing of the Vedantic teachings. So the next we'll look at the timeline of the major, what I'll call spiritual events. It's not from a, no, sorry, we'll do that one next. What the Aryan culture brought with them is the Vedas. And this is one thing that all modern day Hindus do have in common. They believe in the Vedic teachings as the root. All the other practices can be very diverse and they can vary from village to village and things. But the one common thing is the belief in the Vedas. Now the Vedas, even though I have it depicted here as scrolls for the purposes of discussion, it's really an oral tradition. It's preserved orally to this day and transmitted orally to this day, more like the picture that I have here, where you have the teacher in the center, the disciples sitting them around, and they're translating it. Now, because the Vedas are divinely inspired from sages receiving these in deep meditation with communion with the divine, they have to be transmitted syllable by syllable, inflection by inflection, with no change. So they come to us today preserved in the original format with the original inflections with no change. They're not allowed. So it's called Shruti. It means they heard, not necessarily in the same sense that you're hearing me talk in this room, but during deep meditation, these are divinely received scriptures. And so they get passed along in this oral tradition. Vedanta, which the society I'm representing, is a culmination of two words. Veda, which means knowledge, and anta, almost like the English word end, right? So it literally means the end of the Vedas. And the Vedas have four parts. One is called mantra. It's chants and hymns. The next two, Brahmana and Arankya, are very specific actions and rituals. The last of the four is the Upanishad, and that is the high philosophical teachings of the culmination of all of these activities. Why do you do it? What does it mean? And we're going to look. So when I talk about Upanishads, remember it's the high philosophical interpretation of the Vedic teachings. So we'll see these Upanishads come up, especially in part 2 of tonight's talk when we look at the very abstract teachings. Okay, you can go on. Take a look at the history. So about 1500 BC was the start of the Vedic period in India and the writing of the Upanishads. Around 300 BC was the Buddhistic period, as well as the epics. Now, what are the epics? The epics are great poems, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and these tell the stories of gods, and it's really the archetype personalities that are common to all cultures that are depicted in these Hindu myths of gods and goddesses and things like that. Coming out of the epic period and the Puranic period, which is more stories and more parables, we come into the Tantric Yoga period and then into what we call modern day Bhakti Yoga, and the start of the Ramakrishna order was 1886. All of these writings have to do with religious and social obligations and duties, how to live a proper society, wealth, economic policies, but in an honest and integral way. Arts, emotions, love, which are the sages recognized are part of human relationships as well. But the most important is this called moksha, liberation, freedom, spiritual release. And a lot of the works focus on that, especially the Upanishads, which is the fourth part of the Vedas, and some of the more modern writings or the derivative writings from that. The thing to remember about the epics and poems is they're considered smriti, remembered, as opposed to the Vedas, which were divinely received. So that's just a point to remember as we go forward. So the epics can change, the stories can change, the parables can change, and there's no prohibition or nothing wrong with an author doing a slight respin or a slight modernization of those, but you can't change a single syllable in the Vedas. Okay, we can go on again, please. So what is the essence of this? Before we get into the detailed philosophy, the essence is this. We are immersed in what they call samsara, the continual cycle of birth and death and rebirth. The universe, according to this, consists of 7 higher planes, heavens, and 7 lower planes, hells. And depending on how you live this existence, determines what happens to you at the death of the body. The death of the body is not the death of the person, according to Vedanta. But if you lived what we'll call a bad life, and I've just indicated by skull and crossbones here, everybody can define for themselves what a bad life or an evil life is. You may descend into a lower hell for some time, and when you exhaust or you pay your debt to that hell, you get reborn, perhaps even as a lower life form, is one of the teachings. If you lived a virtuous life in this world, you may ascend to one of the higher heavens, but maybe not the highest heaven. And then you may come back as a spiritually oriented person to live what we'll call the last life, in which the goal is to be liberated from this cycle of birth and death. Okay? And this idea of 7 higher heavens and 7 planes of hell is not just unique to this Hinduism. The great Italian poet Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy, which has 3 components to it, right? The Inferno, which describes the 7 lower planes of hell in great detail, great gory detail, actually. It's the most graphic and most physical description of the 3 of the trilogy. Then he comes up in the Purgatorio, which is sort of the transition after descending to the lowest hell and start coming back up, which is the period of trial and earning, and then finally rises in the Paradiso. And the descriptions in the Paradiso become more and more etheric, more and more light, until he has the divine vision. And then what does he say at the end when he comes back? I was lucky to have that vision. I can only capture just a bit and put it into symbolism. I'll describe it the best I can. And that's consistent with us too, in that the ultimate truth is very hard to capture in symbols. I'll do my best when we get to the abstract part of Vedanta later today, but always remember that the truth is tough to get into symbols. A quote from the Upanishads describes this process here, saying how Udana, which is one of the inner currents in the body, conducts the soul to the virtuous world for virtuous deeds, to the sinful world for the sinful deeds, and to the world of man for both. Come back and try again, basically, is the idea here. But none of these 14 planes, according to Vedanta, is the goal. The goal is liberation, to realize your oneness with, I've depicted it in two different ways here, one as the symbol Om, but also one as the all-seeing eye. And I'll explain that in more detail, why both symbols are acceptable in our tradition later. Okay, you can go on to the next one, please. So to live these Veda teachings, two sort of pathways evolved. One is called the householder lifestyle. The householder lifestyle is a person that grows, gets married, concerned with health, wealth, and good rebirth. So they're not ready for the highest realization yet necessarily. They, some of the values in the householder traditions are the birth of a son, honoring the ancestors, living a righteous living. They still want to live what we call Dhamma, the right, living the society. It gives rise to what we'll call a temple Hinduism, a priestly class that basically does the rituals on behalf of families and things, a multitude of gods and goddesses, some of which I have depicted here. The stories, the epics, are the primary guides. A lot of people living this style of life may not have even read the Upanishads or have heard the Vedas. This is sort of the guides are more or less the myths. And you can have local deities in India. Sometimes there's a god or goddess local to a specific village. And that's all acceptable in the context of Vedanta because, as we say, people go from lower truth to higher truth, right? That ancient Aryan philosophy that I talked about. You never want to step on somebody. You just want to help bring them up from wherever they are, closer and closer, show how their truth fits in with the universal truth. That's the idea. We can go on one more time. So some of the values for householders, the three phases of life. There's the student, often which the students would go to live with the teachers in what we might call a boarding school today, but the students would leave the village and go to the local teacher for some years, get training, and then come back to the village, become a householder, have a family, contribute to the society in one or more ways. And then at the end of that period, they would become what they call forest dwellers, or what we might call retirement. We retire from our commitments to the society, or the obligated commitments to the society. We still may contribute in other ways, but then that's to finalize their last life, put their life in terms. It gives rise to what they call the varnas, or you may call it class. Originally there were three Brahmins, which are the priests, the teachers, and the preachers of the society. The Kshatriyas, which are basically the governing class, the kings, the warriors, the soldiers. The Vaishyas, which are basically the merchants, the artisans, farmers. After some time, a fourth class came up, might call them untouchables, laborers. And I just want to point out right here that Vedanta rejects all of this right out of hand. So although this was originally how things evolved in India, it is not accepted by Vedanta. Vedanta sees all beings as divine. So I'm not telling you that this is what Vedanta is. I'm just saying this is some of the history of that society. Vedanta rejects it outright. But for people following the householder life, they are said to owe three debts. One is the study of the Vedas, which underlines all of Hinduism. Birth of a son is owed to the ancestors, and the making of sacrifices is said to be owed to the gods. But the goal here is material success, righteous social behavior, and pleasure. There's another lifestyle which gives rise to this Vedic teaching, and that's called the life of renunciation, or the renunciate's life. For a renunciate, it's to seek liberation. It's to escape this wheel, this cycle of birth and death at any cost. And for that, they reject everything that stands in the way. It's a monotheistic system, and it's non-dualistic. It follows the teachings of the Upanishads and the Vedanta Sutras. And realization of this highest truth through actual experience is the only goal of life by somebody following this monastic path. And the teaching is that liberation is possible in this life if one lives properly. Okay? And again, we see the same idea in Christianity. There was the parable or the story that the rich man went to Jesus and said, "How can I find this kingdom of heaven that you're talking about?" And Jesus answered to him, "Well, go sell all that you have, give it all to the poor, come follow me." Right? This idea of following the teacher. That's not to say that householders cannot reach the highest. Okay, there are even today in India a little shopkeep and some people which are recognized sages, and they are not monastics, but this is a different way of life of approaching these Vedic teachings. Okay, we can go on. So this person here, actually, Swami Vivekananda, this person here, he was just on the other slide, in 1886 founded the Vedanta Society of Providence, he founded the Ramakrishna order, of which the Vedanta Society of Providence is part of the Ramakrishna order. When you go into any Ramakrishna order, temple, monastery, or society, you'll have on the altar these 5 figures depicted here. It's centered around the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, who lived in the 19th century. And Sri Ramakrishna was said to have practiced all of the different faiths. He practiced Christianity, he followed Islam, and his conclusion after practicing many of the traditions, or all of the traditions, was as many faiths, as many paths to the one true reality, which is why Vedanta accepts this. To the person to his right is his wife, Sarada Devi. And although they were married, it's said in the tradition that they never lived as a married couple. They lived as monastics, and a very ascetic, simple life to demonstrate to the people of the time that yes, you can be married and you can follow these things and teachings, and they were very inspirational. Some of the teachings of Sarada Devi, one of the most famous is down here. She would say to the people that would come to see her, "If you seek peace, my child, don't see the faults in others. First seek the faults of your own self, improve yourself. In other words, don't be judgmental." Again, a similar thing is in Christianity there. Don't look for the speck in your brother's eye if you have a log in your own eye. So there's some commonality there. And so the Ramakrishna order is based on the teaching. The other 2 figures are Jesus Christ, which is accepted. He is accepted as an incarnation of God by this order, and the Buddha as well. So again, consistent with the message that Vedanta accepts the saints and sages from all traditions. This emblem I'm going to explain later. There's a lot of symbolism there, which will come up when I get to this part 3 of tonight's talk, called Practical Vedanta. Each one of those components of that emblem has some symbolism to it, and we'll talk about that later. This next picture is the monks of the Ramakrishna order of the Belur Monastery in India, with their motto written in here in Sanskrit, which basically their motto is they go out into the world after taking their vows for the liberation of oneself and the good of the world. Again, consistent with this idea of getting out of the cycle of births and deaths and serving the society. So these are the folks who have sent Swami Yogamananda to Providence, and at Aaron's request, Swami asked me to come, and that's why I'm with you folks tonight. We can go on. So this is sort of the introduction and the background. Now we're going to get into the second part of the teaching, which is the deeper dive into the teachings of Vedanta itself and the descriptions of existence and the goal of life as described in the Upanishads. And this blue block right here says it all, really. All is Brahman, nothing else is real. I have now given you the highest Upanishadic teaching. I could stop here. Of course, it won't serve our purposes because I promised a 1-hour talk, and a statement like that on its own needs a lot of explanation, really, as simple as it is. So we'll dwell on this idea for the next several minutes. Okay, you can go on, please. Okay, so again, the highest truth, according to Vedanta, is all is Brahman. Everything is Brahman. I'm going to do my best to convey this to you over the next 15 minutes or so. So we'll look at some phrases first. The universe and the soul inside each being is Brahman. And the universe and the soul outside each being is Brahman, according to Vedanta. And already we get into a little bit of an issue here because according to Vedanta there is no inside and there's no outside. However, for the simple meditating purposes, we'll assume that we have an inside and an outside. But Brahma is the origin and end of all things, material and spiritual, and the source of everything. It can neither be taught or perceived as an object or as a symbol, but it can be realized through intuitive meditation. And so the goal of Vedanta here is to realize that we are not seeing the reality as the reality is. We call that ignorance, a state of ignorance. And when that state of ignorance is removed, the truth of this, what I'm telling you, becomes immediately apparent. We realize the truth of this, and then one is free, here and now. Or as Jesus would say, the kingdom of heaven is within, or as they said in John, know the truth and the truth shall set you free. All of these ideas are consistent. As soon as we know the truth according to Vedanta, we are free. Okay, so let's go on and take a look and see how we can begin to approach this. So I got a lot of work to do on this one picture. I could spend some significant time. So let's start here on the rightmost side. We'll call this the outer world, the world of gross objects, what we're experiencing sort of right now in this room. So I have an emerald there, a ruby, an amethyst, some gems, an elephant, and the Earth-Moon system. With respect to the person, indicated by the blue and the brain, that's the outer world. According to us, we're looking outward. We have this imaginary separating line here, which sort of separates us from the world, or we have this illusion that we're separated. All of these objects, whether they send light vibration, sound vibration, heat vibrations, or into the brain then creates a picture of this outer world. But we're only sensing in certain frequency bands. We're not sensing in everything. And furthermore, all measurement is subject to error. So Vedanta will say that the senses alone, eyes, ears, touch, and things, can't give you or can't bring you the highest truth. That's the outer world. Now let's take a look at the inner world. So you'll notice, you might say, well, how come you made that elephant out here nice and clear and that one on the inside a little blurry? Well, one of the things we all know is that we experience things, and then we try to recall them at a later time. The memory of something that we experienced earlier is never as clear as the moment when our consciousness was fully present, such as now. Later, when you go back and try to remember this talk, you may remember some things, but your memory probably, unless you have that eidetic photographic memory skill, which some people are said to have, is not. And modern neuroscience also shows that memories can be adjusted. Witnesses can be eventually led or made to believe things, and there's a lot of research going on now with neuroscience to say that memories can be implanted, tweaked, adjusted, and exploited sometimes for wrong purposes. You'll say, well, if the elephant is blurry, why is the diamond so bright and shiny and crystal clear? And here what I'm trying to convey is the following idea. We have a representation of gems in the outer world. We can abstract that, first of all. We can say emerald, ruby, amethyst, but it fits in a general classification called gems. So I can abstract something I'm seeing in the outer world and form a different idea about it. But I can also improve on the idea and sort of the underlying story that we say here. If we were dirt, if we were clods of dirt, our gods, our things that, to which we would aspire, might be gems. But if we were gems, what we would aspire to is the highest possible gem, which we would consider diamond because of its unique properties. It's the hardest known mineral. It has great conductivity properties and things like that. So we'll say that the diamond is the highest representation of the field of gems. The other thing we can do after looking at the outer world is we can begin to abstract about it, daydream about it, plan about it. So if you see the Earth-Moon system, you may begin to think of space flight. And space flight was always something of interest to mankind for all of these years, for humankind for all of these years. And you may begin to come up with abstractions, such as, in order to get that rocket out of the gravitational field of the Earth, I have to get a velocity equal to these terms here, which is the gravitational force, the mass of the Earth, and the radius of your launch. So I don't want to get too much into that, but you can come up. So the journey to the moon is really a lot of equations underlying that space flight and some great technology. Basically, this equation tells you have to have a staging rocket. You have to have more than one part that has to separate out enough to achieve that velocity. I'm not here to teach space science, so we'll just let it go at that. But all of these things, from the point of view of Vedanta, are objects, whether they're internal objects or external objects. And they're all being lit by the light of consciousness. And so it's said in the Upanishads there that the light of consciousness needs no light to make anything shine. It gives its light to all of the things. And so it's illuminating all of these things. But again, according to Vedanta, this is just all superposition on the pure consciousness. Our goal is to realize the oneness with the pure consciousness. And so we go from the gross outer world all the way back to the source of I am. Okay, you can go on to the next one, please. So if you follow that okay, I'm now going to give you the yoga analysis of what a human being is. So we start, again, with the gross, the outer gross, which they call the food sheath. That's this physical body that you're looking at right now. Easily encompassed by a box that's 7 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, right? My physical presence doesn't take up much space in this room. But when we get into the subtle body, which has to do with energy, mind waves, and intelligence, each of these are more subtle than the others, certainly more subtle than the gross body, but they're depicted as larger than the body. Why? Because the more subtle you get, the more expansive something becomes. So again, for example, my body is only taking up a small space. The vibrations emanating from this body hopefully are filling the whole room, or at least far enough back to where all the folks are in the very back, right? The ideas that are riding in those vibrations, how I chose to put the talk together, could expand even beyond this room. And you might think, well, wait a minute, how is that possible? Well, each one of these ideas that I'm putting out right now on my sound waves are affecting you one way or the other. You may say, total nonsense, don't go see him again, and you tell everybody if they have him again, it's not worth going. Or you may like the ideas. It may inspire you to read a book or to pursue this further. Or you may go tell somebody who's not here today, hey, I just heard a talk on Vedanta, it's very interesting. Maybe we go down to Providence and hear the Swami down there. Something like that. So the ideas riding on the sound are even more expansive than the sound itself, which is limited to the room, which is more expansive than the physical body. That's what the yogis were telling us. And lastly is the bliss sheath. I'll talk about that in part 3. And I have a few quotes from the Upanishads here that clearly depict these layers from the gross to the subtle. At the innermost is the Atman, the self, the thing that we're trying to realize. And although truth cannot be colored, it's not red, it's not yellow, the reason I use red and yellow to represent the outer Brahman is because the Upanishads describe the self as a flame on the heart of all beings. So I'm kind of representing it there as the flame. It's the microcosm which completely mirrors the macrocosm. And by meditating inward, we can realize the outward. That's the idea of this picture of the yogis. So we'll go on one more now. If you followed this so far, are we okay? If there are questions, I guess we can, otherwise we do it at the end. So with that, the 4 original monasteries of Vedanta took one saying for their monks to meditate on, or for their disciples to meditate on. So we'll start here in the east. The Puri Monastery, they meditate on consciousness is Brahman. So these are the great sayings of Vedanta, the Mahavakyas. In the south, in Sringeri, they meditate on I am Brahman. And here again, just be aware, it's not the small physical I, but it's the I of the inner self. In the west, in Dwarka, they meditate on thou art that. And that comes from the Samaveda. And in the north, in Jyotirmath, or the Monastery of Light, they meditate on this Atman is Brahman. And this is closest to the picture I depicted, where this Atman in the center of the heart is the same as the Brahman in the outer world. Okay, so these are the great teachings. If you go one more slide, we'll do a little practice on it. I got one more before we do the practice. Okay, so how do these things come about? So this was from another talk I gave at Vedanta Society a couple years back, called What We Can Learn from Dreams. And through the study of all the different states of consciousness, the great sages came up with this conclusion that all is Brahman. And this is one of the analysis that they did. So they talk about Brahman, this Atman, this Brahman, should be the same by now, you should understand that to be the same, as having 4 quarters. And the 4 quarters are the following: waking consciousness, which we're experiencing right now; dream consciousness, which we all, most human beings that I give talks to, acknowledge that they've experienced something like that at least once in their life. That's where we withdraw our awareness from the outer world. When you go to sleep and you have a dream, you're generally not aware of your physical body. But there's a whole other world going on inside, right? We kind of just showed that. When you can withdraw from that world, you hit the 3rd state of Atman, which is called dreamless sleep state. And you say, well, but I really wasn't conscious during dreamless sleep state. But you were. And the reason we know you were is because, let's say you go to sleep tonight and you wake up tomorrow and you don't remember any dreams that you had. This felt so, oh yeah, I slept so well last night. Well, how do you know? You see? How do you know? Some part of you was there. You were witnessing that state. However, the dreamless sleep state, the way the sages describe it, is it's a homogeneous state of consciousness, means it's undivided. There's no division into worldly objects or dream objects. So it's a homogeneous, it's a state of bliss actually, but it's an unconsciously experienced state of bliss. The 4th state is you can reverse this process consciously without falling asleep and experience the inner bliss without falling asleep. And that's called the 4th state. So that's why they say the Atman has 4 quarters. Dreamless state is the 3rd. And from this analysis, you look and they say, well, waking objects which come and go, right? A little while ago, there was nobody in this room. We're all here now. A little while from now, this room will be empty again. When you were a child, you had different toys and things than you do now in your life, right? Even the physical structure that we're made of, the bones, the cells, they change over every couple of years. Even bones change over. So everything comes and goes. So they say, the sages say, that waking objects themselves, including our own physical body, are like the illusions seen in the dream, in the sense that everything comes and goes, everything is impermanent. So they say here, thoughtful persons speak of the sameness of the waking and dream states because the objects have a similar nature, meaning they're transient, they come and go. But the all-pervading witness, which is behind all of that, never goes. And that's the idea. Both entertain us, both can torment us. This world, right? Sometimes you come home and say, boy, what a day I had today, kind of tormenting me, right? And in the U.S., we're kind of lucky. There's other parts of the world that really have some problems. Or the world can entertain us, and the dreams can entertain us. But according to yoga, both go away when the mind is conquered, right? And they're both, the world is, in that sense, as illusory as a dream. So now we'll do the practice, and then we'll get into, can you back up one? Did you double hit it? You may have double hit it. There you go, all right. Okay, so we'll get into, this is from the Katha Upanishad. Atman, smaller than the small, greater than the great, is hidden in the heart of all living creatures. What is here, the same as there, and what is there, the same as here. And he proceeds from death to death, that cycle of birth and death. Who beholds a difference between this and this? That's the teaching. So how do we go about it? Well, the first thing, as I said, the same thing that you do during dream sleep is, okay, just hit it once. The first thing we have to do is meditate so deeply that the awareness of our physical body goes away. Now, if you remember what I'm representing by this orange field, it's our thoughts, it's our inner world, it's our energy, it's our body energy. So at this point, we're meditating, we're feeling that. Okay, but of course that has to go away too. So when you achieve a certain level of proficiency in meditation, you can eventually shut that off, right? Pass through the dreamless sleep state and just focus on the sense of I, and eventually merge yourself into the one unified field, which, as I started this section of the talk, according to Vedanta, is the only reality. Okay, so that's the sort of the abstract part of the talk. So now we'll look at some of the principles that they derive from that experience. Once you have that experience, God is one. That field that I just showed you is one. It's one unified field. There's no difference in there. People worship differently because when you come back from that experience, if you're lucky enough to come back, Dante Alighieri came back, a few of the sages come back, a lot of the people can merge right into that, won't come back. The people that are said to come back are come back free of the obligation of birth and death, and they come back as illumined teachers to lead the rest of humankind to that experience. So the truth is one, but the sages describe it variously. Dante Alighieri's description, he said, I saw the universe bound together as pages in a book, with the binding being love. Okay? Similar ways the Vedanta sages also describe it. But myths, rituals, philosophy underlying all religions will always differ because they're being told in different cultures, different climes, different languages, different geographies, so the symbolisms will be different. The direct experience of the Godhead is the same for all. It's the uniting factor, and it's really, if you think about it, it's the basis for universal brotherhood. On the physical level, we all have differences. In the mental level, we all have had different experiences, different thoughts, so we're different. But if there is a universal brotherhood or humanhood, it is this, that we are all one at the level of awareness. And the ultimate goal of life, as I had pointed out earlier, is to realize this truth of oneness. And the act of realizing it, or the fact of realizing it, alleviates all fears, according to the sages, and all the miseries in life. There's nothing to fear. What are the three things people want, right? Everybody wants to be happy all the time, right? Can we ever put a limit on our happiness? Can we say, all right, if I'm happy for 5 years, then will I be happy? Would I be content with being unhappy for another 5 years? We want permanent happiness, eternal happiness. eternal bliss and eternal knowledge, right? Sat Chit Ananda is how it's called in Vedanta. So to have eternal happiness, one has to be, and to have eternal knowledge, one has to be. And so having this experience eliminates all fears. And the saints and sages of cultures in all religions speak of this direct experience. Okay, so it is truly a universal. Okay. I've depicted that. I've tried to summarize this section in this one picture, which again needs a lot of explanation, but it's the one light of consciousness illuminates all. So whether you're a monastic, whether this light of consciousness looking out through a monastic body, living in a monastery, studying the Vedas, or looking out through a householder with a family and worshiping a local goddess, or looking out through a scientist who's not really focused on religious activities but just studying the outer world, as each perfects their area, their mastery, you tie it back to the one light of consciousness. You'll ask me, well, how come you didn't put something in the top? Actually, I did. And I made it really dim. And I did that for a reason. Because Vedanta says that the realization that it is this one light of consciousness which transcends and illuminates all, there's no fear of death any longer. Because you realize, if you realize yourself as one with this, as these come and go, as you take up different lives, different vocations, different points of view of the world, as long as you never let go of this, when the body falls off, it doesn't matter. So that's why they say, lead us from death to immortality. Realization of this brings us immortality in this sense. Not immortality of a physical structure, but realizing that this is what we are, not these are not what we are. So that's the high abstract teachings of Vedanta. How are we doing on time? Are we okay? We have a little bit more time? We'll come into the last section, which we'll call practical Vedanta, or the teachings of Swami Vivekananda in particular we'll focus on. The idea here is each soul is potentially divine, and the goal is to manifest this divinity by controlling nature, either external or internal. We do this by work or worship, psychic control or philosophy, by one, more, or all of these, and be free. This is the whole of religion. This is a teaching of Swami Vivekananda, who started the Ramakrishna order. So we talk about these things called 4 yogas, and I'll explain the 4 yogas. But this is really the next step in human evolution. So evolution brought us up to this state where we are, humanity. We've gone through lots of different phases, but we're now at a state where we can know right and wrong. I depicted it by an angel or devil, but that's only, again, symbolic. We live Dhamma, the right way to live. But at some point, you may look around at all of this and say, is there more? I want to know more. Something all brought you out here tonight, right? And so whether you call it an inner calling, a curiosity about what else life has to offer, or sometimes a sudden blow or dissatisfaction causes folks to begin to wonder, what this life is all about. But whatever it is, you can mythologically, we can call it Krishna's call to higher consciousness, but it's really this innate calling, this innate desire for happiness, for truth of what existence is. Because up to that point, our senses, our mind, our ears, is pulling us outward into the outer world. The idea is through meditation is to discipline our senses, pull it back in, focus in on the inner. And again, as we just did that little exercise, meditating on the inner self, realize the highest truth. So this is sort of the practice. So we talk about what we call the 4 yogas. Each one is to cultivate a certain aspect of a personality, to round us out, to bring us to this next highest state of evolution. So now I'll explain the Ramakrishna order symbol. The lotus represents the yoga of devotion. And these are practices designed to mature and cultivate a person's emotions, to bring us to a high maturity level. There's the yoga of action or service, and there you view selfless service to all people as worship itself. And sometimes you may have seen the greeting that sometimes they do like this when they see people, namaste. Namas means a bow, te means to you. So it means they're recognizing the divinity in all people. Yoga of psychic control is represented by the cobra on the outer ring, and as I explained, once we just shed our body, there's a whole lot of psychophysical energy going on inside, and so the yoga concentration is on those internal states. And as I was talking just before the talk, actually, we talked about the development of intense concentration without cultivating proper emotions and without getting some sense of control and some sense of right and wrong is very dangerous, because a person who is angry by nature or jealous by nature and hasn't resolved some of these basic conflicts, or feels beaten up by life or a traumatic childhood experience, whether it was their fault or not, to begin to concentrate on that too heavily before you've matured your emotions becomes dangerous. You can become more angry, more jealous, more agitated. So the sages who put forth these practices do disseminate them in a careful way, which is why oftentimes you're required to live with the teacher for some time so they can observe and guide, make sure you're staying on the right path. And all sages also talk about a dark night of the soul. You'll come so far and you may open doors within yourself that you then need to deal with. And all of the saints, St. John of the Cross was one, and there are many others too, that talk about the dark night of the soul. So from where we are to the state of ultimate bliss, there's a journey. Okay? And yoga philosophy, we've looked at this already, how the sages reasoned about the dream state and the world state and used very intense logic to come to approach this truth. But we need to be, all of these aspects of a person need to be met. And so with the yoga of devotion, the waves simulate action, sort of the same way the Colorado River carved out the Grand Canyon. Action is very powerful in rounding. Psychic control we talked about, and then philosophy, which is symbolized by the rising sun, light, illumination. And when all of these come together is the vision of the swan, the Atman, the self, the truth. Okay? It requires internal integration is the first step. Okay, so this is again from the Upanishads. Now as a man is like this or like that, according as he acts or as he behaves, so he will be. Good acts will become good, a man of bad acts. And again, this was because of the time frame that these were written. It was written from the male gender. It's not intended to be that. So you can, if you don't like the word man, you can just substitute in person here. So as a person acts. And they say here that a person consists of desires, and as the desires, so the will. And as the will, the deed, and whatever deed is done, the results will reap. And we also see this too. I think there was a parable in the New Testament, what you sow, you shall reap. But for these reasons, the sages tell us the world, in some way, this world, is made up of our desires. So we all see the world through our own filters. What we judge as good or bad is usually based on the point of view of, does it advance my particular agenda at the instant in time, right? So in some way, the world is made up of our own desires. Okay. Biologically and physiologically, we talk about two things, the first homeostasis and the second homeostasis. The first was achieved by nature for mammals, and it is primarily physical in character. So you know that like certain reptiles and turtles, they have to come out in the morning and sit on a rock to bring their body temperature up, right? Cold-blooded animals. Well, as mammals, we've evolved in such a way that nature now takes care of that. We have very good temperature regulation. Even if we're off by a few tenths of a degree, we feel feverish or we feel sluggish. The chemistry, things go on automatically. What this did was it freed the upper frontal cortex for creativity, for art, for imagination. And that allowed human beings to sort of become unique within all of the other creatures. However, according to Vedanta Yoga, this is not an end in itself. Even some of the great neurologists say, you know, for mammals, homeostasis was survival. For mankind, it meant emancipation. Why? It freed us from managing our physical elements to giving us reasoning power and the ability to be creative. But according to Vedanta and Yoga, there's a second homeostasis that's possible. It requires self-effort, mainly meditation and the practice of the yoga. It's mental in character, and it requires, as a starting point, a stable moral life. Its attributes are calmness, self-discipline, and right living. And one of the quotes here is yoga, meaning to join. Yoga means to join a yoke. The English word is yoke. Equanimity of mind under all circumstances. And you can see some of these yogis and things in the Himalayas. They'll go for a swim in a stream that's probably 33 degrees, right? It's frozen, it's up in the mountains, and it's snow on both sides, and they'll get in and it just, or, you know, so really control of the mind. That's not the goal according to Vedanta, but it does show some of the control of the mind that's possible through these disciplines. And the human being is unique in that we have the neurophysiological system which supports pursuit of this second homeostasis. Okay, so we're coming down to the finish now. So yoga, in this sense, it's not the postures and things that are taught in gymnasiums where there's one very physical sort of practice, hatha yoga, for tuning up the body and developing flexibility and things. That's not the total yoga that we're talking about here. The yoga that we're talking about here is primarily a spiritual and mental practice. The other part just tunes the body and gets you ready for sitting in meditation for 3 hours without feeling the body. It's not easy to do. But it is the union of our outer world and the inner world, right? So these are all of the things on a day-to-day basis. We have duty, we have work, service. We want happiness and recreation, work. Maybe some participate in worship. On the inner side, it's meditation. We derive our inspiration, our creativity from these inner meditative states. It gives rise to really a spontaneous and ongoing bliss and joy. Even before you reach the highest realization, you do get a sense of bliss and peace. And it's really the harmony of these two worlds that we're seeking here as the practical approach to Vedanta. And the culmination of a dedicated effort, well, I'll quote here from George Feuerstein, Yoga, the Technology of Ecstasy. He says, the yogi, or the practicer of these, discovers experientially his own body as a vast sea of psychophysical energy and experiences the reality behind the mathematical models of quantum mechanics or physics. We come back to, if you remember the chart, Thou Art That, which was the Dwaka, the Western monastery, is what they meditate on, is the realization of that through these practices. The ancient sages found that in the innermost core of the human soul is the center of the whole universe. And that's the truth according to Vedanta. So with that, I think I just have 2 more slides. So it's usually traditional to give our salutations to the great teachers. So for those teachers whose works I used in preparing for tonight's talk, Swami Vivekananda, founder of Ramakrishna Order, also a disciple, Swami Ranganathananda, Paramahansa Yogananda. Those are the references if people want to read some more. And on the second page, we have the original founder of Vedanta. One more, Gaudapada. His student was Adi Shankara, who reformed the monastic order of the Vedantists, and then Swami Chinmayananda with his guru there. And those are the references from these that I use. So with that, friends, thank you for your time. I hope that the talk was of interest for you and was a valuable use of a Friday night, which time is always so demanding on everybody. I thank you all for coming. And now we can have a dialogue, discussion, question and answer, or you can just feel free to do whatever you would next do on Friday night. So thank you, friends.
Do we have any questions?
Yes, thank you for your service too. You saved the day technologically. So
what happens once you achieve, you break out of the cycle of life and death? So you mentioned so that you're either going to one of the seven, you're going to the current plane or one of the seven levels of heaven or hell. You break out of the cycle, where do you go?
okay, yeah. So you realize
You just become part of all of it?
So you become part of all of it. There's a little parable that they tell. It's like two people were walking down the street and they came by they see this big wall and they hear some music and some festive and they smell good food. One of the people one of the persons goes up and over the wall and goes in and gets taken up with the music and the food and everything, never comes out again. The other person goes up and goes in and also sees the same thing. Says, what a wonderful thing, the food, the music, everything is so good. But my brothers and sisters are still outside the wall and they don't know about this place. I'm going back to bring them here. So most people will merge in and not come out. A few descend from time to time from there as the great world teachers, what they call divine incarnations. So like a Jesus Christ or Krishna or Saint. So they say saints and sages come from time to time to bring the people, to lead the people whenever there's necessary. So they don't believe in one incarnation, but a continual chain of teachers. So what happens is most people will go in and just realize and stay. That's it. I mean, the words, there's no physical going in, and it's really hard. You realize the truth of it, and that's it. Others will come back as world teachers, as Lvmen sages. And when they do come back, they have no obligation for rebirth. It's their own choice to be a savior or of service to humankind. So I hope that did justice to your question.
You talked about Dante Alighieri. Was he noticed kind of having a big spiritual awakening before writing, the purgatory, all of his works?
I'm
So
sorry.
you talked about Dante Alighieri and kind of, I'm familiar with his works, but I wasn't familiar with the fact that he might have had some spiritual awakening before he wrote those texts. Is that kind of commonly known? Or?
Yeah, if I remember, I'll have to paraphrase. I don't remember the opening quote, but he's running through a forest, right? A dark forest. And he's looking for his teacher, I think, and he's running through a forest, symbolizing he's in wilderness, he's in darkness, right? And he bumps into who will be his guide through hell, right? And you have to, just go off and just read the first paragraph. It's really fun. But yeah, so something happened, right? In terms of what really happened to his life that give, this, there's also Nostradamus, right? And his traditions and how he was supposed to have induced these by studying into a black pot of vibrating ink. How it happens to everybody, I can't really answer, for that, other than, we all seek for happiness, seek for truth, and it will be dispensed according to our status and, our progress and our diligence and our birthright, I guess.
You mentioned meditation a couple of times throughout the
Yes.
lecture. What would be a typical progression for somebody who would be coming into starting to meditate and moving onward towards, what you described?
Okay, so typical, your teacher will prescribe a certain we'll observe you for some time. After understanding who you are as an individual, you know, what you need, we'll prescribe maybe a specific mantra, specific number of times to do the mantra, or something like that. You may meditate on light or sound, or whatever the teacher tells you is the right path for you. And then as your spiritual journey evolves, they'll adjust that teaching. Again, kind of with the 4 yoga philosophy, right? If you're an emotional person and you need certain balancing, you'll get prescribed certain. It's very unique, it's individual. It's not like I can just go tell, you know, go do this, this, and this kind of thing. It's right, it's subjective, it's based on the individual, based on their particular needs and questions in life and things like that. So that's where the teacher, and it's an oral tradition, so you can proceed on some general lines, and then I think similar to Masonic, there's probably an initiation stage, and you know, they will give you a specific practice tailored to the individual, which according to the tradition, the teachers are all knowing and they can see exactly what's right for the student and give each person the right.
So would that be specific to the Eastern world where you would join a monastery, or would there be like a Western equivalent of that, of taking night classes or something like that?
So, you know, we have lectures, kind of like the lectures I gave today, and there are general practices you can do, certain basic meditations and things. You don't have to necessarily, I haven't been to the monastery, so I'm not a monastic, so I don't want to mislead anybody. So, you know, the teachings that each person gets is relevant for their life, whether you live a householder life or a monastic life. Whether there's a higher initiation for monastics, I have no knowledge of that. It may be true, it may not be true. It just may be that they work harder at it than some of us.
So if someone were interested in this area, kind of going down that path, you would reach out to your organization and maybe look into taking some meditation classes or something like that would probably be a good first step?
Sure, yeah. There are lectures on Tuesday and Friday nights. And from time to time they have an all-day retreat typically on Saturday, where they'll have a visiting Swami that's not normally at that center, but from a different center come. So they just, because each Swami has a slightly different style, a different personality, and they give, you know, day-long lectures and things like that. There's morning meditation every morning. You can go in, there's no prerequisites or anything. You can go, you stay as long as you want. There's evening meditation to 7 to 8:30. Again, you're not obligated to stay for the whole time. You go and start to extract from it what you need from it, and then as you progress, you know, you can decide what's the next right thing with the help of the teacher. What's the next right thing for you?
Dharma is the right living, right?
Dharma, yeah, it's the way of living.
So is that spelled out in the Upanishads, like how you should live and what's right and what's wrong?
Yeah, there are guidelines in there that explain, you know, what an ideal society might be, you know, truthful. I mean, one of the highest ideals of Vedanta is called ahimsa, meaning non-injury, right? Not so. Don't kill any beings, don't crush any, you know, so you can kill people in a lot of ways, right? There's the physical killing of a person, but if you step on somebody's spirituality, you crush out their hope, that might be a killing worse than physical death, actually, right? So ahimsa is a very high teaching. You know, you try your best to love and serve, those kind of things. Honesty in dealing, you know, a day's work for a day's wages kind of thing. So they have all of those guidelines there too. But at some point, I think, you know, when you reach the highest truth, it's said you know intuitively. It's not like these sages. It is said that they will never violate any of society's conventions or things, but they're free to act in any way they need to act at the moment. So it's a complex kind of an idea, but you're not confined to any particular man-made law, but you're governed by spiritual law, so you'll never violate the convention of a society, or, you know, you won't but you're still free to live appropriately as you need to.
Is that, so when you said Vedanta, is that like a specific flavor of Hinduism, or is that, like, what is the Vedanta?
Yeah, Vedanta is one of the 6 orthodox branches of Hinduism. As I explained at the earlier part of the talk, you know, because of the way all of this came together with the Aryan migration from the north and the indigenous peoples, there's a huge variety of behaviors and practices and things that go under the umbrella of Hinduism. The common tie is the Vedas. They all do accept the authority of the Vedas. But Vedanta is what we'll call the highest reading. It's Veda, knowledge, Anta, end, and it's monotheistic and it's all-encompassing. So I guess from their point of view, or from the point of view of Vedanta, it's the highest reading of truth in that.
The monotheistic piece comes from, obviously, there's all different, we call them deities, you know, within the faith, but they all kind of tie back to one.
Correct. They're all, the way the Vedanta philosophy ties in and doesn't see any incongruity with that is each of these entities, again, like the objects in the dream state, right? So gods, goddesses, they come and go and things, but the only real reality behind all of this is the Brahman. So these are just temporary gods. So they don't violate anything. They're there, they come, they go. So from a Vedantic standpoint, there's no conflict. It allows the temple, it allows the village people to do what the village people want to do until such time as they feel they may want to move on to a more abstract philosophy and that kind of thing. So.
Quick question. Fine. Would okay, with this for Hinduism and Protestantism, it'd be kind of like Protestantism and Christianity, how they're different. You have Christianity like as the base, and these are similar to various sects or offshoots. Would that be kind of like a similarity, or am I misinterpreting this?
Let's say it one more time for me, please.
I'm sorry. You're saying with the village, soy village, and you have Bonnie as kind of like the overall base here on the various, I would say styles, the various groups of village. Would a similarity would be how in Christianity or Protestants, which are similar generalities, but you'd have a different, almost like sets. Would that almost like be?
Yeah, you do have that somewhat in Christianity, right? You have, Catholicism, and they have more ritualistic and larger practices. Protestantism came along and sort of rejected some of that.
Exactly.
And even within Protestantism, there are different branches. They all have the common thread of the belief in Jesus Christ as the sole Savior, right? So a little bit different than this, where Saviors can come, but they have the Jesus Christ as the sole Savior.
Right.
But within that, the interpretations and the practices and the behaviors, vary from church to church or from sub-denomination to,
Thank you.
sure. Thank you.
Is vegetarianism encouraged, or is it not a factor at all?
Vegetarian, so we look around the world, a lot of different practices prescribe or prohibit certain things. Okay, some say no alcohol, others say wine is okay. Some say no stimulants, caffeine, things. Some say meat, some say no meat. So from a yoga standpoint, well, all of these things, so everything you ingest in your body, right, whether it's coffee, whether it's a certain plant food, everything slightly changes your body chemistry, slightly changes. So what they did in something called Ayurveda, which means science of life, is they characterized the impact of every substance on the human body in 3 categories. Something that is called sattvic, which tends towards calmness, rajas, which tends you towards activity, and tamas, which brings you towards dullness. So nutmeg, for example, is highly tamasic. You take a lot of nutmeg and you go into a semi-stupor kind of state. Now, it said Nostradamus used to induce he used to use a lot of nutmeg to induce his states, right? Yoga doesn't recommend nutmeg. So when you get to the meat now, or the vegetarianism, as you try to tune your body to more subtle states, you become aware of the impact of these substances on your body, right? So everybody, I don't think anybody in the room would be surprised if I tell you, if you go drink a 6-pack of beer or 5 cups of what's like the strongest coffee you can get, you know, super latte, something like espresso, sure, right? So if you have that, you will know. I mean, most people will feel it right away, right? But after if you don't use those things for a long time, and then you go have a cup of tea, you'll actually feel, you'll be able to perceive. So after I did, you know, followed the yoga teachings for quite a while, so I can feel even a single cup of tea. You know, that's just a reality. Doesn't make me special or anything other than that, I'm just not, you know, I can just feel the slight change. And so the sages did that for every substance. And we all know, and you're seeing it now actually more, even more recently in modern times with the effect on young kids. And they're talking about gluten-free diets and certain things, sugars and things, that if you have a child that's hyperactive or ADHD and these kind of things, if you can change the diet on these kids, you can begin to see behavioral changes. So that's the idea behind it. And also the ahimsa part, you know, it's better if you don't have to kill to survive. Okay, it doesn't mean you can't, right, if you don't want to. So that's sort of the history and how it comes about.
I'm sure you've noticed that, you know, the term yoga has become very commercialized, and it's infiltrated what we know as society and it's become very popular. How has that helped or hurt what you guys do, and how do you view any benefits to it, or do you see it to be negative?
Okay, no, so Vedanta and our groups, we're not evangelistic, we're not, and we don't proselytize, right? Kind of even like the Masons, right? I think you have to inquire to get in, right? I don't think you go out and advertise. So we don't solicit for membership, we don't, right? The benefits come from, certainly there are health benefits to it, right? So if it helps the society and, you know, just keeping a more fit, more flexible society, that's great. So no problem with that. It does bring people into touch with some of, eventually, you can't help. The thing with the Hindu, and again, I'll use the big umbrella Hinduism, after some time, it's like being in a kitchen. You can't be in the kitchen for a long time without coming out with the essence of the scent of whatever was being cooked, right? So, you come to yoga, but you begin to pick up essences of these things. For those who want to then dive deeper and get into it, that's fine. If you stop and just treat it as an exercise class, that's fine. I don't want to use the word us per se, but I want to justify, you know, answer your question in the right way. It's something people do, and where it leads them, you know, it's up to them. It's not any gain or loss from the Vedanta Society standpoint. So I hope did that address your question?
I just didn't know how it's, because there seems to be a movement to be more in touch with universal truth in general. Mm-hmm. And in addition to that, there seems to be a movement for people to be to want to be healthier. It all goes back to happiness, of course, but mm-hmm. They want to be happier, they want to be healthier, they want to be truer to nature, they want to eat organic foods, and I think that's trying for a lot of people anyway. From my perspective, is that they're trying to seek a universal truth, and a lot of people may have been brought up one religion or another, and maybe they didn't follow that path, or they're not spiritually connected with that path any longer, but they're still trying to, live under the laws of nature, and maybe yoga has something to do with that. Maybe for them it's just eating healthy. Maybe for them it's just, exercising, doing something else. But it seems like society right now is moving towards a conscious effort to a universal truth. The desire, it seems, is there to move towards that goal. And I just was asking, like I said, has your society experienced a benefit to that
Okay.
people seeking that kind of knowledge?
Yes, I understand. Yeah, so I think generally the whole humanity does seem to be, coming towards a higher, and they do in the ancient Hindu traditions have what they call the cycles there. So there's like a golden age, and then it decays to a less golden age, and finally comes to the bottom, and then starts to come up. So I think generally those who practice that kind of Vedic astrology and things say we're on the upside now, sort of consistent with your observation. And I think the society we live in, the stressful, high-tech society also drives people to wanting a more simpler life and more connection. Just like the internet stuff, right? They're doing more studies now of the impact on web surfing on your brain processing. So we're teaching people to scan quickly, catch key phrases and ideas, but not necessarily think as deep. And they're starting to do studies like this at some of the universities on deep thinkingness versus just quick scanning. And the other thing is all of these traditions were originally, all of these epics and everything were so the memory depth on practitioners of this. I mean, even if you want, you just go, if you do go to Providence, actually, talk to Swami Yogatmananda, you'd be surprised. I mean, he knows all of these scriptures, and then he knows you can have discussions with him on almost any field, and it's almost uncanny to the degree, that he can talk about most subjects, and maybe it's just because he meets with a lot of different people every day and just has an incredible recall, but yeah, there's some capability there, there's something there that they knew.
I just wanted to tap into what you said about the cycle. That could go back possibly, my thoughts on it are in the 60s. A lot of the people, a lot of the students, a lot of the kids, young people, did start studying Hinduism. They get older, they had children, they raised children, now they're children's children.
Mm-hmm.
And today, of course, they're my age or older, they're in the position to be a lot wiser, and I think that could be part of the cycle, what you mentioned, because there's just more people from the original, I would say, hippies, their children, their grandchildren, and you have all these people being handed down this information in some which way, manner, or form. So that would create a cycle.
Yep. That's very nice observation, yeah. And sort of the evolution of the human species, right? That's what I talked about earlier, kind of try to...
Why it's become, as he said, more mainstream today. It seems like a lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon. They're not jumping on the bandwagon. It's things that they've gotten through time. You got to understand through time. Maybe, my grandfather was a hippie, and he was a vegetarian, and he spoke about Hinduism. And there's the Maharishi Maharaj Yogi.
Sure.
And it gets handed down, and it becomes, it could be part of another cycle, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Cycles come and go.
So we're having some great conversation, and I just kind of want to invite everybody downstairs. There's some refreshments and some food, and sugar and alcohol and all this bad things.
It's not bad, it's just where you I'll even partake of a little myself. So. Yes?
In reference to what you were talking about, it's really interesting because there's also astrotheology that is a big field today. And one of the things they talk about is that we're not a solar system, we are actually a binary system where there are two suns.
Yeah.
And of course the closest solar system, or the closest sun to us, is that every 24,000 years they kind of cross. And as they cross, there's a higher consciousness that actually comes up. So we have 12,000 as we see the cycles that always talk about here on Earth, the 12,000 year cycles, 11,000 for the sun, ice ages and stuff like that. But when they cross, and we're at that point now where these two solar systems are coming together, and they're going to overlap each other, and the highest consciousness usually comes when that happens every 24,000 years.
I think if you study almost
know?
anything, you'll find a cycle to it.
It
It's
absolutely.
natural.
Yeah.
Life is a
Everything that's natural is round.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's the 24, it's the precession of the equinox too, right? Takes it's about
Absolutely,
20,
yes.
24,000, yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, you've got the sine wave.
And a slight
Yeah,
sine wave on
sine
it,
wave,
yep,
yeah,
yeah.
But you know, it was interesting, we spoke earlier about, you know, some of the things between alchemy and what you did, and it's really interesting how we could almost do a side-by-side lecture on some of this, especially on, you had your 4 yogas, you know, and in alchemy, there's the 4 stages,
Okay,
and you have the 5 elements, the same 5 elements that you use in minerals and basically gems to diamond. They use metals from iron to gold. And as you could look at all this, you know, how they interweave to get to the same thing. It's absolutely fantastic. Great presentation.
well, thank you very much, yeah. I'd look,
It's only gonna happen back to the speaker.
look,
I like to see them both.
Huh?
maybe we can even do a joint presentation if you're interested.
I was thinking that. I'm saying, you know, it would be so interesting to see the Western and the Eastern.
I like to see them both.
Yeah, at the same time, because they interrelated so much what you were doing. I'm sitting there going, oh, he's doing one of my lectures.
Well,
in a different terminology.
But truth is, see, truth is one. People use different terminologies in different language, but the fundamental truth is one, and that's been the.
Traveling west, you will eventually be in the east.
Yes. Yeah, because, you know, it's like you were talking about, you know, the outer, the inner, and alchemy is the outer, inner, and the group.
Okay.
So you start with first all your own inner junk. There's 12 disciplines to that. And when we start talking about the dark things that you have to overcome, when you start meditating, you have to address.
You will address them.
You
yeah.
will address all your horrible stuff about yourself that'll come up. And it'll come up. It regurgitates right out of you. You just can't stop it
Yeah.
because your realization, you have to realize yourself before you can go forward. And watching what you're doing there, I'm saying, wow, it's like so perfect. It's so perfect. I'd love to do it side by side.
Yeah, so why don't we get contact information
Yeah,
for each
absolutely.
other and.
I think that would be enlightening for everybody, and even ourselves.
Oh yeah, of course.
You know, I
I'll
look at it
definitely.
and go, whoa, yeah, I
Well,
like
That
this.
would,
Well,
that
that's-
would be a great.
I think that'd be
Two
great.
gentlemen could get together
Yeah.
and do a side-by-side presentation.
So let's do it. Let's just make a commitment and
I
find
would
find
enjoy
find a time to do it. And
Yeah, and I thank you for this. Your presentation was cool.
and thank you for the opportunity. I had told Aaron in my email. I said at the end, let's have a discussion. It shouldn't be just like a one-way push, right? It should. And so you want to adjourn to downstairs? We can continue the discussion in. Okay, thank you very much. It was a blast, and I look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
much.
That was.